The Principal Cause of Death. Author Mark Richard Zubero. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Ost. For Michael in learning the meaning of friendship. Acknowledgements. For their invaluable assistance, I wish to thank Mike Kushner, Peg Panzer, Rick Paul, and Kathy Pekasarid. Chapter 4. I scanned the cornfield carefully, left to right and back, no sign of life. I hurried to the bedroom, slipped on some shoes, stopped in the kitchen for a flashlight, and marched into the front yard. The light I threw on the fields barely penetrated the dark, gentle rustlings from the wind, moved the stalks in random bursts. Excellent cover for any skulking attacker. Scott came up behind me. "I'm going out there," I said. "Are you nuts?" Scott said. "If you really think somebody's ready to attack us, then call the police." "I'm not calling the police. This is my home, and I'm not going to put up with any bullshit. If someone is going to threaten me, especially that stupid fuck Bluefield, they're going to know they picked the wrong faggot to fuck with. I'm not afraid of some screwed-up teenager. How about if I feel frightened enough for both of us? I don't want you hurt," Scott said. "Don't do something stupidly macho just to prove a point." I glared at him. "This is my home, our home. If we aren't safe here, secure here, then it's for shit, and we might as well pick up our tent and surrender. I will not live in fear. I better be able to go out into my yard on a peaceful autumn evening." "You're the one who said he thought he saw something," Scott said reasonably. I was feeling unreasonable and petulant. I watched the lights of cars passing on Wolf Road, 100 feet in the distance at the end of the driveway. I walked to the edge of the cornfield and stood poised uncertainly. Lights flashed down at the road. A car turned up the driveway. Probably someone who missed a turn in Mokina. Finally realizing they'd come the wrong way and needing to go back, 1 or 2 cars a day used the driveway for a U-turn. This car kept coming up the driveway. "What the hell?" I said. It was just after midnight, no time for visiting. The car was a 4-year-old Oldsmobile. We walked over. Al Wellman's head popped out of the car. His wispy gray hair seemed more disorganized than usual. He said, "I'm sorry it's so late. I talked to Meg. I've been feeling awful about what I said to you. I was driving around. I turned in to see if any of your lights were on. If you weren't up, I was going to talk to you tomorrow at school." We invited him in. He apologized several more times for the lateness of the hour and for his rudeness to me earlier that day. "I feel such guilt," he said. "You've been awfully good to me. I'm sorry." I told him to forget it. I introduced Scott to him. He recognized the name. "You live here?" Wellman asked him. "We live together," Scott said. "You're lovers. You're..." Wellman stopped. "The things you see today..." "I appreciate the apology, Al," I said, "but it is pretty late. I came for another reason," he said. He paused. I saw something. I may have made a mistake." We waited for him to continue. "I was near the office at 10 after 6, he said. "What were you doing there?" I asked. I was going to talk to Jones. We didn't have a scheduled meeting. I wanted to appeal to him without anyone from the union around. I thought he might be less threatened. I know that might sound stupid to you, but I can't teach that biology class next semester. It'll kill me, so I was willing to try anything. Including murder, I wondered. I let the silence lengthen beyond the uncomfortable. Finally, Wellman whispered, "He was dead when I walked into the office. I saw the light and knocked on his door. It was slightly ajar, so when he didn't answer, I peeked in. I saw the knife and I ran." He twisted his hands together and continued, "I should have done something. I know I should have, but I knew everybody would suspect me. I would be the one to find the body, a natural suspect, and I hate him so much. The police have talked to me several times already. If you weren't such a good suspect, they probably would have come after me. You won't tell the police I was there, will you?" I said. "Did you see anyone in the hallway?" "As I was walking to the office, I saw that Fiona person at the far end of the east hallway, walking away from the office, and I think I saw one of the custodians way down the north hall. He was moving away from the office, too. I couldn't tell if either one had been inside. Fiona or the custodian could have been simply walking from one end of the complex to the other, but I talked to them." Could you tell who the custodian was? Whoever it was had a uniform on. It could have been Longfellow, but he was too far down the hall for me to be sure. Did either of them see you? I asked. No, I was coming from the news section of the building. They were already at opposite ends of the halls. They were in. Opposite ends? Scott asked. I explained the school's geography to Scott. The south wing ended at the far west end of the main hall, and the main hall, continued, but was officially called the East Hall. Just before the office, the North Hall branched off to the left. If one was walking west to east in the main hall, the school's geography was screwed up because it had been built in sections starting just before World War One. The newest section, tacked onto the far end of the old south wing, made the place so spread out that any kid going from a class in the new section to a class in the far end of the old north wing couldn't possibly make it in time. Why didn't you tell this to the cops? This makes them suspects. I told you why. It makes me a suspect too, and as far as I know, those two have no reason to murder him. Did you see Dan Bluefield? I asked. No. Was he around? He claims I was there. I didn't see you, Wellman said. Could any other people have been around? I asked. I didn't see any, Wellman said. Are you going to tell the police that I told you? He asked. I don't know, I said. Scott said, we won't tell. I gave him a startled look. Scott said, Mr. Wellman, how could you leave him there like that? Maybe he was still alive when you got there. It couldn't have happened much before you arrived on the scene. Wellman gulped. He rubbed his hands through his thinning hair. I know, he whispered. I thought about that. I may have let a man die. I guess I was more worried about myself, and I was so glad to think he was dead that the idea of helping him didn't cross my mind. Until later, that is. Then I felt awful at the moment. I only thought that the person being cruelest to me was dead, and I was glad. I know that sounds awful, but it's true. Scott said, I understand. Tom's told me about the hard time you've had this year. We will make it tougher for you. The old man left a few moments later, shaking our heads gratefully and saying he hoped his information would lead me to find out who did it. I wanted to go back outside to examine the cornfields for evidence of skulking watchers. Scott's grumbling about hunting around in the dark annoyed me, but his logic convinced me that stumbling through 6-foot-tall corn in the dead of night with only a flashlight was dumb. After we crawled into bed, Scott turned off his light and rolled over. I asked, why aren't we going to say anything to the police about Wellman? Scott mumbled into his pillow. He didn't do it. How do you know that? I asked. He turned his head to me, one eye peeked from the depths of the pillow. I think he was telling the truth, don't you? I'm not ready to cross him off the suspect list. Okay, don't. But I guess if he thought we trusted him after he confessed, it might help him. He must be feeling awful guilt about not doing something to save the guy. Jones probably died instantly, I said. I'd seen stab wounds before, and this one had looked as nasty as any I'd come across in combat. Tell Wellman that next time, Scott said. Let him feel a little guilt, I said. Scott turned on his side to look at me. You okay, Tom? He asked. No, I'm not okay. The bastard is here practically confessing to murder, and you bid him go on his merry way, and we decided to keep quiet about it. I don't understand it. Do you think he did it? Scott asked. I don't know. If I wasn't so pissed about the police interrogation, I'd call them right now and tell them. That's the only reason I'm not going to, but let me tell you, if they try and arrest, I may have to break you promise. You didn't do it, Scott said. You don't have to worry. Well, I am worried, I paused. I guess I'm more shook up about that inquisition than I thought. Sorry if I weren't so pissed off I'd agree with you. It's okay to be angry, Scott said. We talked for a while longer, but it was late, and slowly we drifted off to sleep. It seemed like seconds later that crashing sirens and flashing white lights blasted me awake. I reached for Scott, who was mumbling himself awake. I rushed to the center of the house, threw open the doors to the outer rooms. No fire, no intruders. I tore open the front door. Light as bright as day flooded the perimeter of the house from lamps Scott had installed on the roof. Caught in the middle of the front lawn was a figure staring towards me. Seconds later, it was gone. I ran across the grass, realizing after a few steps that I had no shoes on. I was surprised to note I'd thrown on a pair of pants a few steps into the cordon. Told me pursuit was impossible. No shoes, and the enemy had a million places to hide. I trudged back to the front porch. The alarm cut off, and moments later Scott joined me. Seconds later, we caught a brief glimpse of a car, tires squealing, pulling around the corner onto 179th Street. "Did you see the guy on the lawn?" I asked. He shook his head. "Could have been Bluefield, I don't know. What time is it?" Neither of us knew. We examined the perimeter of the house. At the back door was found evidence of where the visitor had tried to insert something, maybe a crowbar or a screwdriver, between the door and the jamb. He didn't get far because the alarm had tripped. Back inside, I paced the living room floor and ranted about Bluefield. Scott sat on the couch. When I paused for breath, he spoke. "You said you couldn't be sure who it was." "The fucking kid is out to get me. I am not in the mood to be reasonable." I glanced at the time on the VCR display. "It's 3 in the morning, and I don't give a shit about proof or evidence. The little bastard will not frighten me out of my home." "Fine," Scott said. "You're going to go over to his house and beat him to death. In the meantime, I'm scared for you. I agree, he probably did it, but we have no proof, and you know as well as I do that there isn't a thing we can do." "Tom, do you understand? I'm scared. I don't want you or me hurt, and somebody wants to hurt you. We'll be safe in the city. My building has good security." I picked up the book I'd been reading from next to the battered old chair I usually read in. I hurled it across the room. Scott didn't move. With my foot, I slammed a chair against the wall. The pictures on the wall rattled. The one of him and me with both sets of parents fell to the floor. Scott jumped to his feet. "Tom," his low voice soothed and thrummed at its deepest level. After a few minutes under his penetrating gaze, I eased myself down onto the edge of my favorite chair and hung my head. He came over and rested a hand on my shoulder. After a couple of minutes of silence, he murmured, "Everything's going to be okay." I nodded without looking up at him. We said little to each other as we made our way to bed for the third time that night. I'd picked up the book and carefully placed it on the coffee table. He'd rehung the picture. I stared up at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to him breathe. I could tell he was still awake. I thought about the day, kids, murder, and fear. A long while later, almost in spite of myself, I felt sleep coming on as I drifted off. Scott moved close and placed his arm gently on my chest. "I love you," he whispered. Early the next morning, Scott drove me to school. He would pick me up later. I took my cup of coffee and trudged up the stairs to the library to talk to Meg. The first thing she said was, "You look like hell." I told her about the previous evening's activities, including what Wellman told us. I thanked her for convincing the old man to come talk to us. "He's susceptible to my charms," she said. "And you have many," I said. "The worst part of all this is I feel rotten about being mean to Scott. He's trying to be calm and helpful. I just get more angry and feel rotten about being angry, and on top of that, I'm torn between guilt and anger with Bluefield." "Scott loves you and understands," Meg said. "He knows you're not a saint. As for Bluefield, why are you still feeling guilt about hitting him and hating him? After what he did last night, I'd be ready to consider murder. Last night I wanted to hurt him. Now I don't know." I shrugged. "I know it doesn't make much sense," she said. "You're right, it doesn't make sense. I wasn't there last night, but I think it was the kid attacking your house. Good thing you have the alarm system to scare people away. You've got to solve this murder nonsense. You get that out of the way and you're in good shape. I can't believe the police were so rotten." "They were. I didn't mean I didn't believe what you said. I guess I meant I didn't believe they would act like that. The interrogation was nothing compared to what I've been through before. I guess it upset me so much because they seem to believe the kid, and I know he's lying. If they really believed him," she reminded me, "they'd probably have arrested you already. Are you going to tell the police what Wellman told you?" "I promise Scott I won't unless I have to." Switching topics, Meg said, "I've got something that may help when you talk to Fiona." It turned out that Fiona had sex with a large number of the men on the faculty. Meg read my mind. "If she were a man, you'd all congratulate him on his conquest. Because she's a woman, she's a slut." She continued her story. Supposedly, Fiona had bragged that she'd had sex with over half the men on the faculty. sometime in the last 10 years. She never approached me, I said. You wouldn't have noticed, Meg said. You are one of the least susceptible men to feminine charms that I know, and we both know the reason. Anyway, why would she open up to me? If the gossip line knows about it and she brags about it, what's to threaten her with? Meg said a good portion of her conquests have been here at school, in classrooms, broom closets, anywhere you could lock a door and not be seen. Push her on the issue, I'll bet you get something. I shook my head dubiously, but said if I had to, I would use the information. The bell rang for class. Meg gave me words of encouragement as I left to teach first hour. Being in front of the kids that day was worse than it had been the day before. I was tired from lack of sleep. My arm hurt, and more of them had heard about what Bluefield had said and done the last couple of days. I found myself disciplining more than usual, even if the kid who tries something is an asshole, the other kids get restless. The cycle of respect is broken. The relationship you've built up with them changes. At noon, weary but determined, I set out to ask more questions. Yesterday, there hadn't been enough time for me to get to the last person on the list. Georgette gave. Max Younger, the debate team coach. I needed to talk to Marshall Longfellow, and I had another reason to speak to Fiona Wilson, besides the fact that Wellman had seen them both in the hall yesterday. I greeted people in the teacher's lounge and found Younger pounding on the pop machine. I tapped it just above the coin return lever. A coin clinked inside the machine and a can of diet soda fell into the bin. I asked him if I could talk to him outside. I need to eat my lunch, he said. This won't take long, I said. He grumbled about not having enough time, but he accompanied me out to the hallway. Max Younger wore a beard on a pinched and narrow face. I knew he starred in all the local dramatic productions at the River's Edge Community Center. He was in his late 20s with an attractive wife, whom I'd seen once or twice at faculty parties. I'd heard he had quite a temper while putting together the school plays. The ones I'd gone to had been excellent productions. Perhaps his standards required him to pressure the kids extra hard. Before I even began, he said, I don't want any trouble. I was here. I told the cops that I was working on the sets for the new production. Usually, several kids are here with me, but the first performance is next week, and my production, stage, and prop managers were all out sick Monday, and some of this stuff has got to get done. You just can't count on kids. You were here by yourself, I said. Hey, I'm out of this, he said. I talked to the cops. I had no reason to kill Jones. He gave us a big budget that we were real pleased with. He opened the lounge door and slipped inside. That had gone quickly enough. I thought I'd try Fiona, and I found her in the department office, sitting in front of the computer screen. She didn't look up as I entered the room. She pressed several keys, and one of the figures on the chessboard on the screen moved. She looked up. No one else was in the room. I sat on the desk next to the chamber. What? She asked. Fiona, someone saw you in the east hallway the night of the murder. Her gray eyes stared fiercely at me. Who's the liar? She demanded. I don't want to reveal my source. If it was really a source and not something you made up, you'd go to the police with it to clear your own name. Do you want me to go to the police with the information? I asked. I met her gaze levelly. Why were you there? I asked. She drummed her fingers on the computer keyboard. The machine beeped at her several times as she inadvertently ordered chess pieces where they couldn't go. She pressed several keys and then returned to staring at me. I'm not telling you anything, she said. Feeling less than proud of myself, I said, I hear you managed to make a lot of the men on the faculty feel good. What of it? She demanded. It's the 90s. No one cares, so take your threat and shove it. You were there, I stated. She banged her hand on the computer console. She spoke through clenched teeth. Look, if I thought it would really help you, I'd tell. What do you mean, if you thought it would really help me? That's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard anybody say. What were you doing there? I won't sit here and be insulted. I said, it's time to tell this to the police. I marched to the door before I could slam it. She called out, No, wait! I halted with my hand on the doorknob. Please come back, she said. I don't want trouble with the police, I'll tell you. I reseated myself on the desk. She turned off the computer, fiddled with the disk for a minute. gave me a grim smile. This is embarrassing, she said. You can't tell the police. I didn't do anything illegal, and I certainly didn't kill him. Why were you there? I asked. She clutched at the chain around her neck, pulling the tiny gold cross that hung there back and forth over the links. I talked to him. I left him alive. She paused, her right hand continuing to fool with the cross and chain. What'd you talk to him about? She blushed, then murmured, He caught me. Caught you? Here in the office. I was having sex with one of the teachers here, who's not married and who wasn't here Monday night. Jones walked in on us. We had our clothes off. And She stopped, gulped, and resumed. Each of us thought the other had locked the door. It was after school hours. We weren't hurting anybody. I know I'm living with someone, but... She shook herself. I don't owe you an explanation about that anyway. He caught us. When was this? Last Friday. He said he'd decide on disciplinary action over the weekend. He wanted to see us in his office after school on Monday because he went to the hospital with Bluefield. I had to wait until after the chess club meeting. Why'd you go by yourself? It was my fault. My ideal. I wanted to have sex here. It added excitement to the whole ideal. He was angry that my partner didn't show up with me. Who was your partner? I'm not going to tell you, now or ever, even if you tell the police. I'm being honest with you as much as I can. I'm hoping you'll believe me. I can't believe you turned in a fellow teacher. She hadn't wanted to help me the day before, but now she expected me to stand loyally by her. What did Jones say? I asked. He wanted me to resign. I refused. He said he'd make the whole thing public, go to the school board. What you did may not have been specifically illegal, but it was certainly dangerous. It wasn't the first time, she muttered. Any kid could have walked in, and probably would have walked out without saying anything or causing a stink, she retorted. Anyway, Jones wanted me to quit. He claimed he was being as nice as he could, trying to avoid a scandal. I don't think he told anyone else before he died. If he hadn't told anyone, that gave you a good reason to kill him. I didn't kill him. I'm being honest with you, and it would make a stink if you told. But I'm also being fairly safe. You have no witnesses to this conversation. I can deny anything I've said, claim. You are making it up. I'm helping so I can get you off my back. Yes, I know it doesn't look good, but I had no reason to want him dead. He was actually pretty nice about it. I've had offers in private industry. Many people with advanced degrees in math have it. It's not like I haven't thought of quitting it. I left him alive. Promise you won't say anything. I wasn't the last one to see him alive, according to what you said, and that would help get me off the hook. You still found the body, and you had a fight with him. Please, you can't tell my name might be in all the papers. I couldn't take it. My reputation would be ruined. I've been worried that he wrote something down or left some kind of record. I've been afraid every minute that the police would be coming to talk to me. I've got a resignation written out, but I haven't submitted it because it might look suspicious to quit right now. When things die down, I'm leaving. I cooperated with you. The least you could do is cut me a little slack. The bell rang for 5th hour. If she was the killer, then my knowledge could be just as dangerous to me as it had been to Jones. I said, I will leave a record of what you said, but I won't turn it over to the police unless I have to. I appreciate what you told me. You left him alive. Did you see anyone else around when you left? No, the hall was empty. Did you see Dan Bluefield anywhere in the school? She hadn't. I went back to class. During my planning period, I hurried to see Meg. I told her what Fiona had told me. You going to tell? She asked. Like she said, she could deny all of it. Wellman did say he saw her. She'd have a tough time denying that. I believe Wellman, but a lawyer could give him a nasty going over. The guy is old, and the lighting at the time must have been uncertain, and he must have been a basket case after seeing Jones dead. You've got people who are better suspects than you. Wellman, Fiona, Longfellow, the custodian, and probably younger. I can't prove any of them killed him. I'm still angry at the police for the way they treated me last night, so I'm not telling them anything until I'm through talking to people. If they decide to arrest me, I'll have to tell what I've learned. I don't want to spend any time in jail. Could they get you for concealing evidence? Meg asked. I don't know. It's a risk I'm willing to take. They're idiots, and I don't have to put up with it. She eyed me carefully and sighed. I think you're making the right decision. I'm not sure why I'm protecting her. Because you're a good guy with a conscience, and she said she was going to quit. I guess I was going to check in with Carolyn Blackburn to see if Jones told her anything or left a written record, although if he did, I assume she'd have said something to Fiona by now. She'd have said something, Meg agreed. He must not have left a record, so Fiona is probably in the clear. Or they haven't found it yet, Meg shrugged. You still have to talk to Longfellow. I glanced at the clock. It would have to wait until after school. I opened the door to my classroom and stopped. 3 items lay on top of my desk that hadn't been there when I left. I drew a deep breath as I neared the desk and recognized the grayish lump in the middle. A dead rat, its head half severed and its entrails splattered from one corner of the desk to the other. Almost absently, I pressed the button for the intercom as I walked the rest of the way to my desk. In the middle of the gore on each side of the rat's head was a picture. The one on the left was a nude female centipede. On the right was a male centipede with the genital section slashed to ribbons. Georgette's voice came over the intercom. Yes, Mr. Mason. Has anyone seen Dan Bluefield in school today? I asked. Let me check. The intercom clicked off. I picked up the trash can from next to the door. Using the spine of my teacher's manual, I nudged the mess from the center of my desk into the garbage. I covered it with several layers of paper. I was furious. Any guilt I felt for beating up Bluefield was gone. There was no doubt in my mind about whom the rat and the nude pictures had come from. Georgette's voice came over the intercom. He's listed officially as absent. One of the kids here waiting to see Mrs. Dalrymple says he thinks he saw him earlier this morning, lurking in the halls. At my request, she sent down Carol Blackburn. I showed her the debris. She lifted a hand to her mouth. This is too horrific, she whispered. Carolyn agreed that this needed to be reported to the police. I passed up the temptation to dump the mess on Donna Dalrymple's desk. Before Carolyn left, I thanked her for backing me up against Dan Bluefield's claim. She said, besides the fact that I don't believe you would molest a child, Dan made it tough to believe him when he only reported it the morning after. Last hour passed in a blur. I did ask if any of the students had seen Bluefield, that they hadn't. I think I forgot to give them homework, and the kids were fairly stunned about that. First thing after school, I hunted for Marshal Longfellow, while keeping a sharp lookout for Bluefield. Once again, the elusive Mr. Longfellow proved difficult to find. I had Georgette page him on the intercom, and he still didn't respond. None of the custodians had seen him for over 2 hours. We began a search. Carolyn Blackburn, currently doubling as school principal until a replacement could be found, joined the search. I hunted through the oldest basement of the school, calling his name without getting a response. I explored every corner. The basement was directly underneath the old gym. From the door I could see the old coal furnaces, which had been converted to oil, then to natural gas, and then finally abandoned. They lurked like cold dinosaurs in dank dimness. Add a few shower stalls, and this could be the locker room. I proceeded slowly through the room. Cobwebs brushed against my face. When I rounded the huge furnaces, the light became dimmer further into the room. In one corner, steady drips of water fell from some of the old beams. I guessed I was beneath the shower room. The drips formed into a stream that flowed toward the back of the room. As I proceeded further, more damp spots appeared on the floor, and more drips added to the flowing water. I began to hear a rhythmic rumbling every 15 seconds. There was a glow in the distance that wasn't made by the sparsely spaced 20-watt bulbs in the ceiling. The rumbling grew louder. I sniffed the air and got the reek of raw sewage. I turned a corner behind the last and largest of the furnaces. On a small platform raised above the dampness of the floor by plastic milk cartons was a twin bed frame with a bare prison thin mattress on top. On it lay Marshal Longfellow, sound asleep. Mounted on the wall, 10 feet from the bed, was a vast array of gauges and switches, along with a blizzard of wires connected to them, and trailing off in every direction. The humming noise came from a large puddle just below the electric mess. The inflowing water from the drips gathered here. But I soon realized the problem was greater than I thought. Every 15 seconds, when the noise came, water burbled up from the middle of the pool of water. I watched this happen several times, and I realized that at every rumble, the water poured in. When the noise stopped, the water receded. But every cycle brought the dank pool an inch higher. It had already reached several of the wires, from which occasional sparks emanated. I wasn't about to attempt disconnecting anything. The smell from the pool of water was ghastly. I guessed the sump pump was malfunctioning. I'd helped Scott replace the one in my basement, and he'd taken extra care to make sure it was connected right for just this reason. He told me some people connected the sump pump to the sewage system, unhealthy and a violation of the building codes. If the pump backed up or otherwise malfunctioned, sewer water would pour into bathtubs, toilets, or sinks. Avoiding the pool of water, I shook Longfellow awake. He snorted and snuffled for several seconds, then saw me and said, "I wasn't asleep, I'm wide awake." He struggled to get up. "Be careful where you step," I warned him. He looked at the floor and quickly moved his feet away from the dampness. "You better do something before this starts some kind of fire," I said. "We got to get this water mopped up," he said. "Shouldn't we turn off this electricity first, or at least get the sump pump turned off?" I said. "Oh, yeah, right." He scratched his head. I moved back a step as the water surged closer. I had no intention of being electrocuted because some drunken fool couldn't find a switch. "We've got to get to the circuit breakers," he muttered. "We've got to cut the power before the water gets any higher." "Where is it?" I said. As he pulled his befuddled self together, I hurried in the direction he indicated. After fumbling around in the dimness for 5 minutes, I found the control panel. None of the switches were labeled. They were all in the same position, which I presume had to be on. Tentatively, I flipped several of them, not sure what part of the complex I was denying electricity to. If a switch didn't turn off any electricity here, I immediately flipped it back on. Halfway through my random search, lights in the basement winked off. At first I thought I'd done it, but I hadn't flipped a switch just before the lights winked out. A howl of complaint came from where I'd last seen Longfellow. I stayed where I was, and I stopped flipping switches. I assumed if Longfellow didn't have a flashlight, then at least one of the other custodians would come hunting the reason for the power failure. I listened to the dripping water and the cursing of the custodian, neither of which seemed tremendously imaginative. A few minutes later, a glow of light formed at the opposite end of the room. In 5 minutes, the entire custodial staff stood around me and the control panel, flipping switches back and forth, trying by trial and error to see which switch controlled what. Longfellow joined us early on in the process. His years of expertise as head custodian led him to continually comment, "No, asshole, try another one." Finally, light restored, underlings dispatched, wires disconnected, and the threat of fire eliminated. I tapped Longfellow on the shoulder. "I need to talk to you," I said. He looked annoyed, but followed me to a corner behind one of the grime and soot-encrusted furnaces. He said, "You're not going to tell anybody about..." He cleared his throat. "About my needing to take a rest?" "I need information," I said. "You talk to me, tell me the truth, and I don't say anything." He nodded glum agreement. I told him he'd been seen outside the principal's office on Monday night at the time of the murder. "No," he said. "Carolyn Blackburn would love to know about your little nap," I said. His bloodshot eyes wouldn't meet mine. "I can't help it," he said. I asked him what he couldn't help. "I need to calm my nerves," he said. "It helps me relax. I'm not an alcoholic. I can say no. It just helps me. But Jones, that bastard, he wouldn't see it that way. He told me to stop drinking on the job. All last year I stopped, just once or twice this year." I took a sip. Longfellow drew a sharp breath and turned his bleary eyes on me. "He caught me last Friday at noon. I was down here. No principal ever came down here before. He did. I've been here 30 years and him less than 2, and he was going to put me on probation like some kid who doesn't even have a high school diploma. He wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Said if I wanted to avoid that, I could resign." He smirked at me. "I know he's been looking for an excuse to get rid of me." "Why did you go down to his office Monday?" I asked. "I had an appointment. I was a few minutes early. It was a short interview. He told me he wanted my resignation Tuesday morning. If he didn't get it, I would be fired at the next board meeting, which is tonight." "Did you fight with him? Argue about it?" I asked. "I tried, but he said he didn't want to hear it. He said it was real simple. I quit or I get fired." He hadn't told Carolyn Blackburn yet. He was giving me a chance to do the right thing. Pissant little snot. I'm glad he's dead. He glanced at me quickly. I didn't kill him. He was alive when I left him. You can't tell anyone this. You promised if I was honest, you wouldn't tell. That wasn't exactly my promise, and the man was a hazard. A fire could have started, or maybe I was overreacting to what I'd seen as a dangerous situation. When Frank Murphy came back, I could reassess my decision not to tell. Nobody's going to hire a 68-year-old drunk, he whined. You promised not to say anything. I told him I wouldn't. I asked if he'd seen anybody else. He hadn't. I had no way of telling who'd seen Jones last. Fiona or Longfellow. Or maybe there'd been a whole string of people to see Jones. When I got back to my classroom, I found Scott sitting on top of my desk, talking to Meg, who had been telling him about the day's progress. I told them both about Longfellow. So you're double in the clear, Scott said. Yes, but I promised not to tell the police or the administration about either one of them. Meg said, and each one of them claims to have left Jones alive? You know Longfellow and Wellman are close friends. I gave her a quizzical look. She said, they used to go out drinking every Friday night. A couple of years ago, Wellman got a scare about his liver and he stopped drinking. I don't know how close they are now. Scott said, could the two of them have planned the murder? We discussed the issue further, but got nowhere. Meg went back to the library. I told Scott about the rat and the porno pictures. The kid's out to get you, Scott said, but we still can't prove anything. Reluctantly, I agreed with him. Let's go to my place, Scott suggested. I want to go to Jones's wake tonight, I said. You sure that's a good idea? The family will be there. Someone might tell them you're under suspicion. I doubt if the police go around to each family and announce who they think did it. The relatives wouldn't recognize me anyway. I'm sure some of the faculty will be there. I'd like to try and talk to a few more. See who might have seen something. This running around school takes too damn long. With a lot of people in one place, maybe I can get more questions asked more quickly. We need to find out if anyone else was around or if somebody else had a motive. I wish Frank Murphy hadn't gone on vacation, Scott said. He might have some good suggestions about what to do about Bluefield. That kid has got to be stopped. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.